Hello world of the internet, Zachary Alexander Reed here on the Genesis Belt, and to continue the theme of Batman, I'm going to play Batman Revenge of the Joker. This is the only thing that I own that is Batman, by the way. To continue the theme of Batman, I'm gonna wear this shirt. Alright, this game is another side-scrolling action platformer just like the last one. Revenge of the Joker was originally released under the title Return of the Joker on the Nintendo in 1991. Then it was adapted for the Genesis in 1992 under the title Revenge of the Joker. No one knows why they changed the name. The game was originally developed by Sunsoft and ported to the Genesis by Wrangler Studio a year later. There's also a Game Boy version, which is very different than the others. The music for the Nintendo was composed by Naoki Kodaka, and later adapted for the Genesis with the help of Tim Tallarico. And for shits and giggles, I looked up the Game Boy version, and the music for that one was made by Manami Matsume. Not good with any of these names, by the way, I'm sorry. Apparently, this is the only US game to have a third-party mapper chip. Whatever that means. Did this third-party mapper chip make the game better in any way? I don't know, but it sure as shit didn't make the game good. I hate this game. I've hated this game ever since I was a kid. It's another one of those games I owned as a kid and I wasn't able to beat. Unlike Tyrants, however, it wasn't because there was a gameplay mechanic that I didn't know about. No, I couldn't beat this game because it's just a bad game. It's a fucking bad game. As a kid, I didn't understand how game design and development worked, but I knew there was something wrong with Revenge of the Joker. Like a pile of vile puke that stagnates into the carpet, I'd stayed far away from this game. And I informed everyone I knew to walk around it and not look at it. The time has rolled on, and I have a better understanding on how video games are made now. Maybe I was just a dumb kid that wasn't as good at video games as I thought. After all, I was wrong about Tyrants. It would stand to reason that I could be wrong about this game. I doubt it, but hey, no time like the present to give it a shot. So here goes episode 2 of Genesis Belt, all of the Batmans. Here we go. The introductory sequence shows Joker escaping to the rooftop, with Batman chasing him on another building. Then Batman pauses for a moment to scowl at the bat symbol, allowing Joker to escape even more so, and then the title screen pops up along with the copyright information. Pressing start a few times shows the developer logo and then the main menu with the options to start a new game, enter a password, or go to the options where you can change your button commands and listen to music. Since I'm just starting the game, we'll go with new game. Deep breaths. Here we go. God, I hate this game. Alright, this first level appears to be on the rooftop of a stone building with gargoyles and a barrel on fire here and there. What a disgusting display of contrasting colors. It looks like a child grabbed a bunch of random crayons and colored this thing. I would have to describe it as color barf, and most of the game is pretty much equally ugly. The music is okay, I guess. It's not spectacular, but it doesn't hurt my ears to hear it, so that's good. There's the letter L in the bottom left corner of the screen showing your life bar, as well as the letter B. This bar fills up whenever you pick up a certain power-up in the game, but I have no idea what its function is. The graphics are gross and the music is acceptable, but the real bread and butter of this disaster are the controls. My fucking god. It's like Picasso decided to work in game design, but instead of contributing to visuals, he took his mindset into gameplay mechanics. Here's how the controls work. Batman has this weird-looking gauntlet-style Batarang launcher, and when you press the A button, he fires a pea-shooter-style bullet instead of an actual Batarang. What the fuck is this thing? The B button is jump, and the C button is a kick attack. If you hold down and press C, Batman will do a slide kick, and holding up and C does a jump kick, which can also be accomplished by pushing C in the middle of a jump, but because of these shitty controls, it's easier to just hold up and C. Pushing start will pause the game, showing your life count, the current level, and the password for the level so you can come back to it later. So those are the basic controls for the game. That is, if they decide to work. Right off the bat, you'll see a crate with a power-up inside. You can shoot the power-up to change what kind it is before you pick it up, but you only have a couple of seconds before it disappears. Each weapon is different in function and power. The letter B power-up fires the same basic pea shooter weapon you start with, except it can home in on enemies. If you hold down the A button, the weapon emits a bola type weapon that spins around, and it'll fire off into whichever direction you hit the D-pad next. This is an awful weapon. Next is the letter S power-up. This weapon fires 3 shurikens at an upward angle. It's not strong at all. Holding the B button with this weapon allows Batman to hold a ball of light that emits damaging sparks, and when the button is let go, the ball circles around Batman for a few seconds. Despite its functionality, it's still weak as a limp noodle. The next one is the letter N weapon. This one fires 2 colorful pea shooters in a spiral pattern. It's a little stronger than the pea shooter, but not by much. Holding the B button makes Batman fire a continuous stream of waves in a wave pattern for a few seconds. If you continue to hold the B button, even after the beam is done firing, Batman will still hold his hand out like nothing has changed. None of these weapons impressed me in particular, but there is one weapon that pretty much carried me throughout the entire game. That is, if you can stomach playing it long enough. The last weapon is the letter C weapon. This weapon fires a single, slower but larger shot that will one-shot all enemies. Except for bosses, of course. That alone makes this weapon your go-to choice, but when you hold down the B button, this weapon opens up into a pulsing shield of energy balls. And when you let go of the B button, they fire off, and if any of those shots hits a wall instead of an enemy, it will bounce off the wall, splitting into 2 more energy balls in the process. You can also increase your firing rate with this weapon by repeatedly squatting and standing for each shot. I like to call this squat shotting. This is obviously the only weapon to use in the game. Now, if you think having a slow-firing weapon might hurt my chances, there's one fact that is also made clear early in the game if you pay attention. The enemies have invincibility frames. This is another reason why having the S weapon is the better choice, as you only need 1 shot to kill for each enemy. Alright, enough about the mechanics, let's get into the meat of this. Let's play the actual game. The first level begins with a soldier dropping in and cheap-shotting you. Cheap shots are a recurring theme in the game, and I will be referring to it a lot. After him is a short haul with spike balls falling and rising from the ceiling, then a quick climb up a tower with a few more soldiers. At the top of the tower is a bridge with some gargoyle statues that will zap you if you get too close. This is literally the only part in the entire game where I use the kick attack. After that, Batman looks to the sky at a blimp, and that's it for level 1-1. It's a fairly easy level that lulls you into a false sense of security, as most first levels do. Now let's go to level 1-2. Level 1-2 is a scrolling level, where you have to jump from rooftop to rooftop while avoiding jumping enemy soldiers and oncoming fire from the blimp in the background. I noticed when you start a new level in this game, your health carries over. So if you survive the last level with 1 health, you start the next one with 1 health, assuring you that you will die a lot in this game, and usually near the start of a level. This level also teaches you to basically never use the slide ability, as there are pitfalls littered throughout this level, as well as many later levels, and if you slide towards them, Batman will instantly fall to his doom, costing you a life. After a couple of minutes, the level stops scrolling and just kind of ends. Well, this is a great segue into the boss. Level 1-3. The first boss in this game is a biker guy with a ray gun? I have no idea who this guy is. Sorry to disappoint you, I'm not like a hardcore Batman fan, so I'm not going to know all of the villains I see. Since this guy seems to be the proprietor of the blimp, I'll call him Blimpy Boy. At the beginning of the match, Batman is infused with the power of having a numerical display for his health instead of a health bar. Why did the developers do this? I suspect it was to make the boss battles longer, or seem bigger than a normal encounter of the game. I actually like this change. It makes the boss battle seem larger and more grand in scale compared to the rest of the game. So Blimpy Boy here is actually really easy. All you have to do is squat shot him to death, as his health is fairly small. He does have a few attacks which are easy to avoid. He can jump at you, damaging you with his body if he touches you, as well as shooting a machine gun both horizontally and at an upward angle. He can also call in a few flying drones that slowly close in on Batman and will damage you when touched. You can easily avoid most of these attacks by sliding under his jumps, shooting the drones, and overpowering him with squat shots. After his health goes to 0, he rapidly explodes, and the level is complete. Always satisfying in an old game when a boss just explodes a lot. Level 2-1. This is another Batman game with what appears to be a factory level. Once again, we're greeted by the theme of this game, cheap shots. As soon as you hop on the first moving platform, you're met with a soldier throwing a knife. If the knife hits you, you fall off and die. If it's your first time playing, this would understandably piss you off. There are new flying enemies in this level, as well as more traps like electric pits, enemies obscured by foreground shit, and a soldier placed right above a moving platform. It's still an easy level and can be beaten pretty quickly. Thankfully, most of these first levels are pretty short. On to level 2-2. In this level, Batman has a jetpack and flies through a large tunnel, like a side-scrolling rail shooter. With his new gameplay mechanic, there are also new enemies. We've got little bug-like creatures that fly in a line to get behind Batman and then home in for a suicidal attack. More enemies include little guns on rails, flying soldiers with guns, some with jetpacks, others in flying vehicles, and spike balls that move up and down as they scroll by. This level is pretty short and pretty easy, and it's also the last part of level 2. There's not much else to say about it except there's no boss battle afterwards. On to level 3-1. This is when the game starts to get hard. For starters, we've got more cheap shots with meteors falling quickly from the sky. The only way to avoid them is to tiptoe through the level and try to jump when you see one coming. These meteors pop up frequently in the level and will chip away at your health until you eventually die. There's also little patches of ice and pitfalls, as well as wizards that will shoot little tornadoes at you, and will do them as soon as they're barely even on the screen. Combine these elements and you get the first really frustrating level of the game. Since I've played this game numerous times before, it didn't take much time for me to get through it, but a newer player would most likely start having trouble here. Level 3-2. Welcome to the video game equivalent of Fat Man's Misery. In this level, you're stuck in a cave with very little room to move around. We've got spinning saw poles that are not unlike the fireball poles from Super Mario Bros. There are enemies that can attack you before you can even reach them, most of the time near a pitfall, as well as falling rocks, but those are easily avoided. It's the confined space and enemy placement that makes this level particularly frustrating. Once you get past the soldiers, saws, and pits, there's another section with a spiked ceiling that moves up and down, kind of like Super Mario Bros. You have to move platform to platform over a pit of lava while killing giant spiders crawling on the floor and avoiding the spiked ceiling. This part is deceptive in making you think that there's enough time or space for you to avoid the ceiling, only to find out that Batman is too fat and too slow to go through quick enough. With good timing, it is possible to get past this part without too much of a struggle. Once you get to the end of this part, the level ends and the second boss battle begins. I have no idea who this guy is either. It seems like the developers couldn't get the rights to more prominent Batman villains, so they either had to use obscure ones or they just made up their own. This villain seems to be a man piloting some sort of battle armor. He can slowly fly over to Batman's location, dealing damage if he touches you. Once he lands, he'll open his cockpit and fire a wide spray of lasers that are unavoidable if you're not behind him. The only way to avoid this attack is to slide kick through him after he's landed. It's a lot harder than it sounds. Both Batman and the villain take up a very large portion of the screen, and there's not much room to move around. You're more likely to slide into him only to find that when you recover from the animation, Batman's hitbox is still in range of the enemy to touch you. It also didn't help that the wonky controls make this battle even worse. I barely beat this guy, and it was only because I lucked out in a few of the times I slid by him and didn't take damage. But, on to level 4-1. Hooray! Another scrolling level. Ooh, this one's a train though! And I don't know if it's because of the background, but I think this one's scrolling faster than the last one. Fuck! Also, at this point in the game, I filled up my B bar at the bottom of the screen. I still don't know what that means. Anyways, it's a train level, where you run across the roof of a train with pitfalls between the cars. The flying soldiers appear frequently here, and there's a new enemy which looks to be a green frogman that hides in the dirt and shoots blasts of energy from his face. Saying that out loud sounds kinda cool. A green frogman that hides in the dirt and shoots blasts of energy from his face. If you die and start this level over again, you get to see how truly ineffective the pea shooter gun is. The flying enemies take more hits than you can throw at them before they damage you. You can try sliding under them, but you risk falling between the cars. I basically had to take a few hits whenever I started this level over. Thankfully, it's a pretty quick level, and if you're careful, it can be a pretty easy one too. It's a far cry from most of the game, and an even further cry for what's about to come. Level 4-2. This is the part where I get stuck. Level 4-2 is not a difficult level. In fact, it's one of the easiest levels in the game. Any level is easy when you've played it so many times that you've completely memorized it. It's barely even a level at all. I would say it's merely an annoying gateway that you have to go through in order to fight the most annoyingly difficult boss in the game. But let's get into it. Level 4-2 is another factory level with some platform jumping at the beginning, accompanied by a couple of enemies trying to cheap shot you into the pitfalls. Then you're on an elevating platform with 2 conveyor belts on the floor to mess up your movement. If you stand still for too long, Batman's standing animation will actually make him step onto the conveyor belt. You're greeted with a flying mini-boss and a laser on a rail, but he's easily avoidable and can be killed in a few seconds. Then a soldier drops on the right side, and after killing him and a literal 10 seconds of waiting, another soldier drops down from the ceiling on the left. The elevator stops, and you work your way through a hallway to the left, devoid of enemies, onto another elevator. There's no mini-boss this time, just more rail lasers and soldiers. Once this elevator stops, the level ends, and boss limbo begins. The Joker is not the main villain of this game. This is the main villain of this game. Allow me to go into great detail on how this boss works and what I had to go through in order to beat him. Because it took a lot. The third boss in this game is a laser cannon. It is placed on the ceiling in a small room, accompanied by a smaller, moving laser gun on each corner, stopping only to fire a laser. Occasionally, a small robot will float across the floor, which will do damage when touched. All of these things will attack in a seemingly random order, except for the main laser cannon. It has to charge before firing, and shooting it slows down the charge time. The laser cannon also moves left or right whenever it gets damaged, so you can't just sit in one spot and rapidly fire at it to prevent it from charging. This means that it will be inevitably fired at some point. When this cannon fires, it will take 10,000 hit points away from Batman, which is 1/8 of your total health. You want to avoid getting hit by this attack at all costs. All of the other attacks do a large to fair amount of damage as well, with the floating robot doing 5,120 damage when touched, and the laser guns in the corner do 3,000 damage when they shoot you. The thing that does the least amount of damage is touching the laser cannon directly, which does 2,240 damage. Even with all of this in mind, the combination of a confined space, the random movements and attacks, as well as the frequency and damage they do, make this boss almost impossible. To make matters worse, the frame rate will dip and rise due to the constant shit going on screen, making the already difficult controls practically unbearable. On top of everything else, whenever you start this boss, the game gives you all of your lives back, which is usually a good thing in a video game, but when you die, you start the boss over with the goddamn pea shooter. Why? So you're basically forced to reset the game and put in the password for level 4-2 and play through that level again in order to get a better weapon in order to fight the boss. This applies to the other bosses of the game, of course, but the other bosses are nowhere near as difficult as this thing. I fought this boss over and over and over, and I had to go through that level over and over and over. Every time I did, I got a little bit faster. I avoided the lasers more often and learned to slide kick into the floating robot if I could. I determined the best way to avoid the cannon's 10,000 damage was to purposefully jump into the cannon and take the 2,240 from touching it, allowing me to avoid the blast with my following iframes. This also worked to avoid damage from the floating robot if I couldn't slide kick it. Going through all of this, it still took me 3 days and 44 total attempts before I finally beat this boss. And barely. After beating this boss, I was ecstatic and elated that I would never have to fight him ever again.
Yes! 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 God damn it! Yes! Fuck yes! God damn it! Yes! Oh!
There's more! Beating this boss is an accomplishment for me, as it was the boss that I couldn't get past as a kid. From here on out, the game's gonna be new for me. on to level 5-1. Where the last boss was the hardest boss in the game, level 5-1 is by far the hardest level, and they made it a sewer level. Yay. Everything here looks like shit except the actual water, which can push you in the direction it's flowing on the ground. It will also sweep away any weapon after you break the crate it's in, so good luck getting a weapon you wanted before it falls into a pit. Enemies include these little red things that fall out of the sewer drains that can damage you when touched, some knife throwers, and a new scuba enemy that pops up from the bottom of the screen and fires a laser. Now these particular enemies appear the most frequently and at the most inopportune times. Even if you memorize this level, it's still impossible to avoid many of the enemies that pop up. You either get pushed into one by the water, or they'll pop up when you're in the middle of jumping to another platform, causing you to take damage or fall into a pit. This makes the level the cheap shot king of the game. It's only hard because the developers wanted to make a false sense of difficulty by placing the enemies where they know it would be impossible to avoid damage or death. The only silver lining is that these enemies die with one shot from any weapon. I beat the level with 1 health left, and that was only because I got a lucky shot on the last enemy due to having the homing weapon by mistake. So thankfully I did get through this level, but it was very frustrating. But now I'm on to level 5-2, so let's see what this one is. This is another flying level, just like level 2-2, except there's even less to say about this one than the last one. Other than the foreground and background being different, it's basically the same. Even the enemies are the same, except there's no spiky balls. It's really short and took me no time to beat. Well, that was easy. Moving on. Once again, there's no boss after the flying level, so we go straight into level 6-1. This level appears to be at a military base in a desert. There's spiky pitfalls, conveyor belts, and soldiers with guns and throwing knives that try to cheap shot you from the other end of the screen. Once past them, you run into a room with these weird lasers firing from the ceiling. If you get close, they begin to fire faster and faster to where avoiding damage is impossible. I couldn't find any other way through them other than just taking the damage. After the lasers, there's a small segment with falling platforms, which leads to a room with a tank. The tank then revs up and the screen fades out, leading into the next level. Overall, this level was pretty easy. Once again, I have to go through a scrolling level. Only this time we're going left instead of right. The tank at the end of the last level follows you closely with a little soldier poking his head out. The tank doesn't hurt you though, because it's in the background. As the tank rolls on, the ground behind you begins to fall, meaning you can't hang out on the right side or you'll fall and die. The soldier will throw bombs at you if you don't kill him quickly, and he'll respawn every few seconds, so you have to keep shooting him throughout the level. He is technically the only enemy here, as the level itself is comprised of hazards, such as buzzsaws on the ceiling and spike balls that fall from the sky and stick to the ground. There's a particular part of the level where you're in the woods, and despite there being more actual ground to walk on, Batman can only walk on the specific part of the ground the tank is going to destroy, which is stupid. Could you imagine walking alongside of a tank and it causes the ground behind you to fall and you just couldn't move slightly to the left or the right just to get more footing? This level is also fairly easy and quick to beat, but there's no power-ups during the whole thing, so whatever weapon you ended the last level with will be the one you carry to the next level, which of course is going to be a boss. Well, it looks like it's finally time to fight the Joker. It looks like I'm at the end of the game. The battle begins still at the military complex with the Joker floating around in a small one-man hovercraft. He moves and stops in random places in the air, and each time he moves, he drops numerous damaging bubbles. This is all he does the entire battle. With a decent weapon and some dodging skills, he's very easily defeated. However, if you die, you'll have to go all the way back to level 6-1 again just to get a decent weapon to fight him. After defeating him, his hovercraft begins to explode and he flies on out of there. Alright, looks like I beat the game, I guess. Well, no, there's more. Even after defeating the Joker, the game unfortunately continues. I guess on to level 7-1. Maybe I was right. Maybe the Joker isn't the final boss in this game. Maybe it is the laser cannon again. Oh god, I hope not. Level 7-1. This is the final level, and it appears to be a ruin in a tropical area set at night. Throughout the first part of the level, you'll run into a few soldiers that try to cheap shot you, there's a few pitfalls, and little hoverbots that fly in an arc that you'll either have to duck under or try to avoid altogether. After that, the ruins lead into a facility nestled into a cave. There's plenty of pitfalls in here, as well as moving platforms, spiked walls and ceilings, and machines in the ceiling that spray damaging bubbles. These bubbles obstruct your path and need to be destroyed before advancing. After one final jump over a pit, the level is over and the next level begins. On to level 7-2. Well, it looks like level 7-2 is the Joker again, and I guess this is going to be the final boss. Alright, it's time to fight the Joker again, and hopefully for the last time. Oh my god! This thing looks like a fucking nightmare. I'm not exactly sure what I'm looking at, but it looks like something out of the mind of H.R. Geiger. It also has 250,000 health, over twice as much as the last boss, which only had 120,000 health. This boss is ugly as shit, but it's still pretty damned intimidating. So, the turquoise thing in the center looks to be some sort of pod with an insect-like mouth underneath. This pod can release a few spiral-looking projectiles onto the floor, which dissipate quickly and are very easily avoided, as long as you don't walk underneath the boss. There's also 2 tubes on each side running from the wall into this machine. With every 2 spiral attacks from the pod, these 4 tubes simultaneously shoot a fireball directly at Batman. This can be avoided by jumping right before they fire so they fly over Batman's head. I typically got off 2 shots before having to dodge these fireballs. Once his health drops down to about 180,000 points, the pod explodes, revealing the Joker inside, as well as 4 small guns, 2 on each side of the pod. Okay, so the Joker was inside this ugly looking machine thing the whole time, so this is actually a fight against the Joker. These 4 small guns will fire 4 fireballs directly towards Batman, just as the fireballs before did, only these are more difficult, if not impossible to avoid. Every second time he fires this weapon, the spiral weapon fires as well, only instead of just falling to the ground, they bounce left and right, starting at the bottom of the screen and working their way up. This is pretty much unavoidable as well. I quickly found out that the best way to beat this form is to go ahead and move directly under him and tank through the attacks, rapidly firing at him from below and just taking the hits. After only my second try, I easily dropped his health down to 0, resulting in the Joker exploding for the final time. Well, that was easier than I expected. I only had to fight him twice, and the second time, all I did was tank through him. That was pretty easy. After defeating the Joker, we're greeted to a short scene of Batman escaping from an exploding island using his jetpack. After the island sinks into the ocean, he flies off to the center of the screen as the credits go by at the bottom. These are the people. These are the people that brought this garbage into existence. Shame on you. Alright, and that's it. That was Batman Revenge of the Joker. And it was terrible. The graphics look like barf. The controls are soggy peanut butter. The level designs and enemy placement are unfair, and everything feels cramped. Batman takes up too much space on the screen, so practically everything hits him. His standing animation can actually hinder your gameplay instead of adding any positive aesthetic. The bosses are ugly. They're unimaginative, especially the laser cannon boss, which was a wall of defeat for me as a kid. The only positive thing that I can say about this game is the music. And even that's only so-so. The most disappointing thing about this game is that the previous Nintendo version is apparently better. The color scheme looks good, and the sprites are smaller with more room to move around. I've never played it, but I've heard that the controls work better too. Hell, the music even sounds better than the Genesis version. It's like they took everything from the Nintendo one, chopped it up into little bits, handed it to another studio, and they couldn't just quite put it back together. Stay away from this game if you can. It's far more frustrating than it is fun. If you insist on playing it like I did, then you should probably try the Nintendo version first. It looks a whole lot better than the Genesis version at least. So, that's another Batman game in the books. That's 2 down, and there's 3 more to go. I really hope the next one is better than this one. Fingers crossed. I'll see you next time on the Genesis Belt, where I play another Batman game. Alright, cool, I got it.